Head kolleegid.
Colleagues. Good morning, everybody. I hope that last night was enjoyable for everybody. We will start with our third session, and this session will be moderated by my colleague Marianne and MIKKO from the EU Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome. Good morning. And I would like to tell that today that is Independence Day of Albania. I wish you, Albania, a very nice Independence Day, and to everybody else as well. Dear colleagues, as Thomas rightly said, I'm member of EU Affairs Committee and also member of Defense Committee. I'm former journalist and former member of European Parliament. Currently, I'm Vice President of Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. Issues regarding the Security Union are very close to my heart, and it's my honor to moderate this session. It is the most basic and universal right to feel safe and secure. European Union has taken decisive steps in order to continue to provide to Europeans safe and secure home. We have taken actions to deny terrorists the means to carry out attacks, share intelligence, protect Europeans online, and manage the borders better. But the most effective counter-terrorism policy is prevention. Radicalization requires measures not only at the EU level, but also national and regional level. Thus, it is a great opportunity to address the issues regarding security union here together with Commissioner King and with all of you, my dear colleagues. In order to better manage the debate, I remind you, colleagues, registrations for comments and speeches is open from this moment onwards. You can request the floor electronically from the seat reserved for you. To register your request, please press the head button on your conference unit. Please follow the instructions on your desk. You can take the floor after the speech, and we will address you when it's your turn. Now, I would like warmly to welcome our speaker of this session, Mr. Julian King, European Commissioner for Security Union. He joined the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in 1985. There, he has held various positions, for example, UK Ambassador to France, UK Ambassador to Ireland, also UK Representative on EU Political and Security Committee. Please, Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for this invitation and the chance to join you in this small and intimate venue. I'm very glad that you're engaging on this subject of European security. And I'm very glad to have this opportunity to talk to you, because I think it is absolutely crucial that we in the institutions in Brussels, particularly the Commission, European parliamentarians as well, have an opportunity to exchange and have I hope, a rich dialogue with representatives of national parliaments. I always try and visit the national parliaments when I'm visiting different EU member states, but I think it's absolutely excellent that you also have these regular occasions to come together and to discuss the subjects that you want to highlight. I think it's very fitting that the COSAC, as I say, with the EU's national parliaments, have chosen to focus today, this morning, on security. Security is, and as I think we all agree, will remain primarily a matter for national authorities, for the member states. It's those national authorities that are responsible for protecting their citizens in the first instance, and who find themselves on the front line, either to prevent bad things happening or to respond if the worst does happen. They have the main operational responsibilities to prevent and manage security threats. But, and I hope that this is now generally accepted, there is more, indeed, that we can and should do at the European level to help and support member states and national authorities as they carry out that vital role of protecting their citizens. And I want to talk today a little bit about some of the things that we've been trying to do together with the member states over recent months on countering the terrorist threat, but also briefly tackling the variety of challenges that come from cyber and cyber threats as well. I think the last couple of years have seen an evolving online security threat picture. And that's obviously been matched by the different challenges that we've had to face offline, in particular from terrorism. We've seen major attacks such as the WannaCry attack. There's ongoing concern about Russian cyber interference. These have served to underline the risk and the challenge of cyber as a means to seek to do us harm, even to raise questions about our democratic institutions. Offline, the continuing terrorist threat, particularly though not exclusively linked to so-called Islamic State, Daesh, continues to evolve with the emergence of so-called low-tech terrorism carried out with little more than a knife or a truck. These threats are obviously very different, but they do have some things in common. In particular, none of these threats respect borders. WannaCry affected people in over 150 countries. Terrorism has struck too many of our member states, and citizens from even more member states have been caught up in those attacks, especially when the terrorists focus on public places where people gather to live their lives. Given the transnational nature of these different threats, the response also needs to be international. And for us, we need to think about the European dimension. Information about a cyber threat in one country can help those in another to build their resilience. The similarity between the terror threat we face in different member states, the techniques used in the Nice terror attack were then unfortunately replicated in Berlin, London, Barcelona, means that it's all the more important to coordinate and organize our responses collectively, learning the lessons from each other. More generally, these are attacks not against any one member state or any one country, but against the values that we all share as Europeans. Daesh stands for everything that we do not. Their barbaric ideology is in direct opposition to the openness, tolerance, and freedom that we stand for in Europe. Cyber attacks, for political reasons, are designed to stir up dissent and to undermine the democratic institutions or raise questions about the democratic institutions that we all hold so dear. So these common threats are, I maintain, best met with a common response. And there are a number of ways that in Brussels, at the European level, we've been seeking to add value to the work of national authorities in keeping us all secure. First, by using the power and the scale of our cooperation, in particular through the single market. This is particularly clear in the case of cybersecurity. All the new, literally billions of devices that are coming online for the Internet of Things will need to show that they are cyber secure. It's far easier for all of us if manufacturers have to do that once rather than 27, 28 times. Earlier this year in September, we proposed an EU-wide certification framework for ICT products and services. Cooperation on research can also help us build our investment, our capability, and our security within our shared single market. We already have a public-private partnership on cybersecurity, and we want to build on that with a network of cybersecurity competence centres and a new European cybersecurity research and competence hub at its centre to drive research in this crucial area. Second, we can, as the moderator said, work to close down the space in which those who wish us harm operate. In the case of terrorism, that means cutting access to weapons, to finances, and interrupting their networks. We've already legislated at a European level, for example, to cut access to firearms and the precursors that are used to make homemade explosives, to tackle money laundering, to criminalize travel to and from Iraq and Syria for terrorist purposes, and indeed to criminalize those who help to train or to fund terrorist activities. But we still need to continue to strengthen our response. Many of the horrible recent terrorist attacks have used the explosive TATP, which remains a weapon of choice for Daesh. And in spite of the work that we've already done, the existing EU legislation in this area, it's still too easy for attackers to get their hands on the products they need to make TATP. So we're reviewing the arrangements, the EU legislation on explosive precursors, and ahead of that review, we've already set out recommendations with immediate effect to help member states to tighten their controls around these precursor substances. We've also done much to clamp down on terrorist financing. We've already largely implemented the action plan on terrorist finance that we set out last year, but we can perhaps still make it easier, more straightforward for law enforcement, for our law enforcement authorities to get direct and swift access to financial information that they need either to follow up and track down the perpetrators of an attack or to build a picture to help increase our chances of prevention, including if that financial information is held in another country. We'll continue to work to ensure that national authorities have the tools that they need to keep us safe. Third, we can and do share experience, learn from one another. Authorities in many different countries are seeing similar trends, facing similar problems, often asking similar questions. And we need to make sure that we are learning from each other's experience. For example, many member states are trying to respond to the common and mounting threat of terrorist attacks against public spaces, as I said. City squares, tourist sites, sports venues. The EU is making available 120 million euros to help national, local and indeed city authorities to put in place measures to better protect public spaces without changing their fundamentally open character. Many European countries are also asking themselves similar questions about how to tackle radicalization. What drives our fellow citizens to go down the route of violence and sometimes end up in perpetrating these attacks? I think many of us were taken by surprise by the number of people from across our countries who traveled to Iraq or Syria, in some cases to go and fight alongside others in Daesh. Or the number of Europeans who didn't travel, but have been inspired at home by some of the horrible stuff that's online to acts of of murder on our own streets. Across Europe, in different countries, we're asking similar questions. How can those on the front line, like teachers, social workers, or those who work in prison services or with ex-prisoners, help to spot what you might call the warning signs of someone who is being tempted down the route of radicalization and violence, and work to try and turn them away from that? What is the role of policymakers, of practitioners and researchers? How can civil society work together to spread an alternative, more positive message directed at those who are at risk of radicalization? European networks can help to answer some of these questions. We have a high-level expert group on radicalization, including national authorities and European Parliament representatives, working with representatives of civil society to try and generate some ideas and suggestions for our future work. They've just issued an interim report, which we will be publishing, and they're going to continue their work over the coming year. Alongside that, as much of this horrible radicalizing propaganda is carried online, we're working with the big internet platforms to try and get better at spotting and taking down this material, or if possible, to stop it going up in the first place. We set up a couple of years ago a forum called the EU Internet Forum that brings together experts, member states, and the representatives of the platforms, the big and some of the smaller platforms, to work together to make progress. We've underlined how important it is to make rapid progress on this challenge. It's best if we can do this on a voluntary basis, but we've also made clear that we reserve the right to resort to legislation if necessary, if the voluntary measures don't go far enough, fast enough. A final thing we can do, beyond sharing experience, is sharing information about specific threats, specific challenges. The existing EU tools help police, border guards, and judicial authorities to share information to carry out their tasks. All the evidence now is that national authorities support this process of sharing across the EU. For example, the number of checks against the EU's Schengen information system rose 40% year on year last year. If police in one country want to talk to a particular person and that person is detected by authorities elsewhere, then he can be picked up and talked to. So each individual national authority effectively gets the support of 27 others. Police services also cooperate in some of our agencies, like Europol. Intelligence agencies across the European Union also work together. They have a platform that they have set up in The Hague. It's outside of the EU framework, but it's a place where they meet and work on a daily basis. We need to get better at how we use information. For example, airlines already collect basic data about their passengers, and that can be a powerful means, sometimes the only means, for law enforcement authorities to identify criminal networks by looking at the travel and movement patterns. It can help not just to investigate and prosecute terrorist offences, but again, to help prevention, to help prevent attacks in the first place. And that's the aim, the logic of the EU Passenger Name Records Directive that all member states agreed we should put in place by May this next year. But there are still gaps and blind spots, meaning that the police or the authorities still sometimes have an incomplete picture. That can have serious consequences. For example, terrorists and other criminals can still hide in Europe behind false identities or multiple identities. as unfortunately we saw in the case of the attack a year ago on the Berlin Christmas market. So we're still seeking to improve these information systems that we've built. A new system logging entry and exit to the Schengen zone has been agreed, and I hope soon we will agree an ETIAS, a European pre-clearance system like the American system ESTA, for those traveling to Europe under a visa waiver scheme. These systems will sit alongside our databases for those linked to crimes or missing persons, seeking asylum, or for third country nationals with criminal records. And we're strengthening each of those databases at the same time. In a couple of weeks' time, we will come forward with a set of proposals to make these different information systems interoperable, to make them work together better. A European search portal will help those on the front line, police and customs officers across the European Union, access the different existing EU information systems simultaneously, getting combined results on a single screen. A shared biometric matching service for fingerprints will mean that authorities can search all of the existing systems at the click of a button. And a common identity repository will store the core identity data like names, dates of birth, gender, underpinning all of the systems to make it much, much harder for someone to hide under multiple identities or under an alias. This is a way of better using the data we already have to allow us to support those on the front line, police, border guards, and immigration officers to do their jobs. These are just some of the ways in which the EU can work to help and support national authorities. But I want to close with an appeal to you, really. We can help, but we need your help too, to help us, to help you. A policy is only as good as its implementation. When we've agreed to act together, we need then to actually do it, to put it into practice. For example, the directive I mentioned on passenger name records needs to be transposed, the target date, as I mentioned, by next May. And that's in all our interests. We will be more secure if this system is working all the way across the member states. In practice, many member states have made good progress, but a few are still lagging behind, some of them quite a long way behind. We stand ready to help with funding, expertise, trying to organize support between member states where the more advanced can help the less advanced. But it needs political will and real engagement at a national level to get these measures in place in time. I just want to finish with a comment about our future relations. I've enjoyed my contacts with national parliaments as I've gone around to the member states. I've always found it incredibly useful to get that direct feedback. I hope that we can continue to have those kind of discussions. But I'd also welcome more structured and collective exchanges with you. In many cases, you send us your views in response to our major policy initiatives, or indeed on your own initiative. There are structured forums for cooperation, such as the new Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group to strengthen the transparency, accountability, and I hope legitimacy of Europol. But I'd also welcome more strategic dialogue with you on these subjects, for example, in this format, so that we can actually get into depth on some of these security themes. Go beyond individual legislative proposals to look at the wider security landscape. I think that's valuable. I think it's a valuable element of our work together to support national authorities to protect our citizens. The security threats we face are not going to go away. Cyber threats are here to stay. And while we're making welcome progress against Daesh on the ground in Iraq and Syria, I don't think they're going to go away either, I'm afraid. the terrorist threat is going to continue to evolve, and we must be ready to evolve our response as well. We can't achieve zero risk, neither in our fight against the terrorist threat, nor in our attempts to equip ourselves to tackle the threats that are linked to cyber. But we can, through working together, cut the risk, reduce the threat surface, squeeze the means the attackers have available to try and do us harm. And we do that best when we work together. And that's what, from our side, we will continue to support. Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner King, of sharing your valuable ideas on this subject. I picked up personally one quite important subject, and that is cyber threats. We Estonians know precisely what is that when your country is out of order as far as cyber attacks are concerned. It happened 10 years ago, and from April 2007, we made our decision. Combat with cyber threats is crucial, and that is important to do all together. But now, colleagues, we can move on to hearing of your interventions. We have about 47 minutes, to be precise, 47 minutes to our discussion. We have 17 registered delegates, and please be very precise. You have 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds to have a speech. Please keep eye on the time. The very first delegate to have a floor is from Lithuania, Mr. Gediminas Kirkilas. Please. Sorry, don't touch the button. Can anybody help, Mr. Kirkilas? Maybe you try once again, Gediminas.
I'm afraid we're not getting any feed into the interpretation booth from the roving mic in the room. Terribly sorry, somebody's going to have to appraise the technicians that we can't hear in the booth.
Mutual assistance in cybersecurity and cyber rapid response teams. Hope PESCO will become a cornerstone of more resilient civil military security architecture for Europe for the years to come. Lithuania welcomes launch of the European Defence Fund. It's highly important to ensure that all companies, including small and medium enterprises from across the European Union, have equal access to the programs co-funded by EDF. Let me inform you that Lithuania since the next year will have a bit more than 2% from GDP defense budget. We are glad about growing common understanding that stronger European Union and stronger NATO are mutually reinforcing. Let's use this moment to move ahead with the strengthening existing and building new areas of cooperation. A stronger and more resilient European Union is a key further strengthening the transatlantic link, including by better responding to calls, more balanced transatlantic burden sharing, and improved cooperation, synergies, interoperability between European Union and NATO. Combating terrorism is one of the goals of the Lithuanian Public Security Development Program 2015-2025. The program tasks the relevant national institutions to take measures to prevent extremist radicalization of population, of join effort to international community to combating terrorism and strengthen protection and resilience of the potential terrorist targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry about some translation problems, but our next speaker is from Belgium, Mr. Veli Yüksel.
Thank you very much, Madam. I'm glad that security has been one of the topics discussed here. After the fall of Raqqa, the headquarters of the so-called Caliphate Daesh, thousands of foreign terrorist fighters will be returning home. In Europe, these returnees are considered a big concern and even a threat by people and security forces. These foreign terrorist fighters use social media on a large scale to spread their extremist propaganda. This propaganda does not stop at national boundaries and can infiltrate communities nearly undetected. At present, the proliferation of extremist content on popular online platforms means that vulnerable people can easily be exposed to messages of hate. I would like to underline the role of social media corporations as YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Recently, Germany adopted a law that obliges these corporations to withdraw hateful and violent content within 24 hours. Last October, a meeting was held at the G7 with the Secretaries of Home and Security Affairs and CEOs of social media players. My question goes to Commissioner King. What was the concrete outcome of this meeting at the G7? And do you agree with me that we need a directive, a European directive, concerning the withdrawal of hate and extremist content on social media? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yüksel. Our next speaker is from Hungary, Mr. Richard Hercsik. Please.
Thank you, the floor, Madam Chairperson. Dear Commissioner, regarding security union, the foremost aspect should be the security of our citizens. Accordingly, Hungary has decided 2 years ago to protect its external borders effectively. We've invested a large amount of money from our national budget to the necessary human and technical sources. Since then, we have received lots of critics, labels, and basically zero financial assistance. But my dear friends, one thing is clear. Without effective border control at the external borders, there is no internal security. Madam Chairperson, it's no doubt in a security union, Schengen should exist. If you look at the recent proposals of the amendments of the Schengen Borders Code, then the times of internal border controls are likely to come back. I find it absolutely unacceptable to reintroduce temporary border control for up to 3 years. This proposal hampers the free movement of persons, workers, and goods. The proposal is also definitely contrary to the back to the Schengen Declaration, the Bratislava Roadmap, and the Rome Declaration as well, and doesn't tackle either the problem of frontier workers or the control of internal green border sections. To conclude, Madam Chairperson, we need a different union which provides effective security for its citizens and doesn't endanger the free movement of citizens. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard Hercsik. Our next speaker is from Greece, Mrs. Ioneta Kavadia. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, the recent launch of Permanent Structures Cooperation on Defence, along with the establishment of a European Defence Fund, was hailed as the beginning of closer cooperation between European states in security and defence issues. The declared goal is to provide a more integrated common European defence by pulling together defence capabilities and integrating defence procurement. That's the official line anyway. However, several questions arise on this new initiative, which is not really new at all. Several attempts and policies with the same goals have been launched in the last 2 decades with questionable results. The main questions that needs to be answered politically is what is this common European defense supposed to do? Who is the enemy? Against whom we need to defend ourselves? Will this be the beginning of a common policy which, along with a strengthened European diplomacy, will guarantee the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states? Or is it merely just another policy aimed at facilitating the interests of the European military-industrial complex? Is this policy the result of an open and democratic debate, or was it dictated by the powerful lobbies in Brussels? These questions seem rather rhetorical. However, coming from a country like Greece that is forced to spend a disproportionate amount of money on defense, they are essential. Allow me to remain deeply skeptical about whether we are indeed moving towards a safer and more peaceful Europe through this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Kavadia. And our next speaker is, once again, from Greece, Mr. Maximos Karakopoulos. Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ, κυρία Πρόεδρε.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The terrorist threat has had a considerable impact, and it has affected the sense of security of our citizens. It has activated certain reflexes that take the form of extreme political choices. There's no doubt that the defeat of the Islamic State and radicalization of a part of the population in the Muslim world has increased risk for radicalized presence in Europe for people who appear to be refugees. For Greece, this is a great concern because we're at the front line of these migration flows. We need to work together. Unilateral action is not useful when it comes to internal security, and there's no point in excessive controls between member states at the borders. Selective intensification of controls for citizens of countries that are on the front line and welcome these migration flows, such as Greece, would de facto lead to violating the terms of the Schengen Agreement while resulting in different categories for European citizens. This unpleasant experience is something I experienced personally. I flew via Munich in Germany to get to Tallinn. Commissioner, this approach in fact undermines our European ideal, and that's why such practices should not be tolerated. Instead, we should look for and try to implement appropriate solutions that will increase the sense of security all over the EU, starting from Europe's external borders. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Karakopoulos. And our next speaker is from Bulgaria, Mr. Ivanov. Please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairperson. First, I would like to thank for the perfect organization and well-chosen topics. Dear colleagues, the term effective and genuine security union originates from the communication of the contributing the European security strategy in the field of counterterrorism and laying the foundation of an effective and genuine EU of security presented on the 20th of April 2016. From the communication priorities, we conclude that the effective use of EU information systems and databases is key to successfully countering the terrorist threat and the challenges posed by serious and organized crime. The building of a new architecture of the information exchange is a top priority of several EU presidencies, including the next Bulgarian. As we know, at the end of 2016, the European Commission presented legislative package on Schengen information system, which we hope will overcome the political barriers to Bulgaria and Romania. Accession to the Schengen Agreement, a move that we believe will improve the security at the European level, giving the future full confidence between member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ivanov. And our next speaker is from Ireland, Mr. Gerard Rockwell. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The comment made by the Commissioner with respect to cyber security is to be welcomed. Indeed, I believe that there is a need for a common cyber security agreement right across the European Union. But the thing that concerns me, and I don't want to be accused of being racist, but the migration crisis has left us with a problem. And the problem is we have thousands of people coming into Europe whose bona fides we cannot establish at the point of entry. We take their word and we allow them in. I am not suggesting for one moment that there is a mass transfer of terrorists across Europe, but there is the potential for some to come in through that system. And that brings me on to the issue of soft targets. It is possible to live in one country and attack in another, and we've seen that particularly in recent months and years. The development which the European Commission is involved in, that's the initiative on supporting soft target protection by facilitating practical cooperation between law enforcement agencies, is to be welcomed. We would like to see greater cooperation at the police side of the management of terrorism across Europe. The Irish, as you know, are non-aligned militarily, and as such, any talk of developing a European army would be rejected and would cause serious problems for our government. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is from Poland, Mr. Pietro Appel.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning. Could I first start by thanking the organizers for excellent work, for hosting us, and for the choice of topics. It's really satisfying to take part in this meeting. Regarding the topic at hand, security and defense, a lot has been said, and I agree that migration and threat linked with it is a phenomenon more and more people are realizing these days. I'm glad there's more and more cooperation too. Criminality is also on the rise, and it's less and less local. It's more and more international and cross-border. It hardly ever stops at the border. It spills all over Europe. So hence my question. Does the Commissioner plan or envisage the development of the Europol to fight criminality better? Are we going to tighten cooperation through the Europol, or are we going to give up this project and rather focus on the Interpol, which is a broader agency? And another question is the bilateral cooperation and exchange between the police forces in the member states. Do we need it? And shouldn't we focus on it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be from European Parliament, Mr. Tunne Kelam, please.
Suur tänu, Mark. King, for presenting us with a very constructive package of ideas. And I think, speaking about cyber attacks present a key strategic threat to our common security. Consequently, they need to be addressed together. And I think one of PESCO's cornerstones could be developing a common cyber defense and cyber security capabilities. Now the role for the national parliaments and national governments, I think, is first to establish clear and binding and common traffic rules for navigating in cyberspace. We don't have such rules today. Second, very important is sharing and coordinating sensitive information about cyber attacks, about our cyber resilience. And I would stress Commissioner King's call of access to different info systems simultaneously. And third is compulsory teaching in every member states of school children and civil servants of cyber hygiene. I think 90% of accidents are happening on the most elementary level, thanks to lack of information, taking risks. And cyber hygiene is as important as teaching school children to wash their hands before enjoying a meal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is from Spain, Mrs. Soraya Rodriguez Ramos. Please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I'd also like to welcome the opportunity for this debate with Commissioner King. When we talk about terrorism and cyber terrorism, we also need to talk about cyber financing of terrorism. If there's anything we've learned from all of this, is that a new source of financing and a new form of financing organized crime comes to the cyber world. The UN Secretary General, in a report published in May of 2016, referred to tax havens, fiscal opaque practices, and the terrorist groupings have managed to find a source of financing through blackmail, extortion, and sale of cultural goods and oil, and virtual currencies which guarantee the anonymity of crimes being carried out. So this is an important source of financing. So I'd like to ask the Commissioner whether he feels the EU directive on combating money laundering is sufficient, or whether we should beef it up to try and combat these sources of financing. And how could we strengthen our cooperation with third countries to combat tax havens and opaque legislation which fosters the financing of these organized crime groups?
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is from Netherlands, Mrs. Renske-Leijten, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for putting this very important subject to the agenda. Security is mostly a national competence. And of course, we should have better use of what we have. We can build systems, we can build databases, we can put legislation, but when information isn't exchanged, it's useless. And now we see that when information isn't exchanged, there is a pressure to put up the task on European level. For example, the European Intelligence Force. And how do Mr. King reflect on this? Would have a lack of exchange and put it up on the European level, would it be violate the subsidiarity? How can we help member states to exchange their information in a better way without making this a European competence?
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is from Cyprus, Ms. Eleni Stavru.
Well, I would like to express the great interest of the Parliament of Cyprus in contributing to implementing the objectives as presented with the aim of security. The Republic of Cyprus is not a part of Schengen. However, we are exploring ways to participate in the SIS2 information exchange system so that we can step up our efforts to combat terrorism and serious cross-border crime. In addition to this, and in the context of our efforts to contribute to limiting the access of terrorist organizations or other criminal networks to sources of funding, we are working together with Europol on exchanging information and best practices in the area of illegal trafficking of cultural goods. As regards the challenges we are confronted with in the name of achieving a sustainable security union, it would be very important to listen to the Commissioner's views on the measures being proposed by the Union to mitigate the impact of Brexit in the area of operational cooperation and exchange of information in connection with Europol, given that British authorities are an important hub for exchange of information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to France. Monsieur Jean Bizet, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to begin by welcoming Commissioner King. I have excellent memories of his posting to Paris. More than ever, Europe has to take on the role as a power to these purposes. It has to shoulder its responsibility for defence, put its added value in combating terrorism and internal security. It has to put this to best use and help to manage the migratory flows. This is an expectation on the part of European citizens, and we have to respond appropriately. We have to express political will based on a shared strategic view, which is founded on a strategic revision of European defence, and bring about intergovernmental dynamism and a permanent political discussion. We need to develop this to fully benefit from the possibilities set out in the Lisbon Treaty, i.e. Permanent structured cooperation. Recent developments along these lines are to be welcomed. It is also necessary to beef up our fight against terrorism, to create a security union. The union must give itself an appropriate legal framework to do so. We have to ensure use, interoperability of European databases that can help to combat terrorism. We also need to encourage member states to set up national PNR registers to ensure that the European PNR is efficient. Police cooperation must be made more efficient using Europol and judicial cooperation, which also needs to be promoted. We have Eurojust to this end. We also need a European investigating magistrate, which is also competent for cybercrime, cross-border crime and terrorism. Thank you.
Our next speaker is from Belgium, Mr. Paul van den Drisch.
Chair, I'll speak Dutch. Voorzitter, meneer de Europese commissaris.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, Commissioner. I'd like to thank the Estonian presidency for the excellent organization of this event. Now, in Belgium, in the last few years, we've had a terrible experience with terrorism, or terrorist attacks, IS fighters coming back, and violence in our streets. Now, it's an inconvenient truth, but I would say that we are maybe perhaps a little bit too tolerant. Perhaps we have tolerated for too long these people who do not accept our societal norms. So we've perhaps been a little bit too lax when it comes to people who refuse to integrate. So I think that a lot of mistakes have been made. And all of this was part of the multicultural dream that didn't really actually work. We can draw lessons from this. Obviously, we need to do everything to ensure that we foster integration. We need to work on language. We need to ensure that we prevent, etc. But, ladies and gentlemen, I think what we need to do is to work in a more repressive manner when it comes to protecting our democratic societies. Because for us, it's a question of rights and obligations. We really all need to take on board our responsibilities. Thank you.
Next speaker is from Romania, Mr. Titus Corlatean.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Mr. King for his presentation. I'd like to make two comments. I think there's a serious contradiction. On the one hand, you have a reference, a justified reference to maximizing the benefits of the existing information systems. The Schengen information system is plugging some holes in the management of the information management system, and we really need to bolster all of our tools, the whole Schengen system and the implementation of the directive on passenger name records. So all of that is important on the one hand. On the other hand, there's an artificial political blockage when it comes to the adherence of Romania and Bulgaria to Schengen. We're being asked to do things to contribute. But on the other hand, we're being prevented from having that full integration. I think it goes against European interests to have a geographical and political entity that will be entirely integrated when it comes to borders. But at the same time, I need to be very honest here. You have a national reaction in my country when it comes to the early warning system. Now, we are the second or third contributor to Frontex operations. But at the same time, we have a problem accessing Schengen, and it really is something that is not right. Now, some member states spoke about the idea of a military Schengen. I would have to say, honestly, that we can't pick and choose. We need to ensure that we have proper free movement within Europe. And if we don't have proper free movement, we won't move forward.
Speaker is from Bulgaria, Mr. Petar Petrov, please.
Thank you. I have read in the background information that work has continued on EU proposals regarding terrorist financing. In that connection, I want to provide some proposals in addition. The EU has to focus in new prevention politics, for example, in control of financing of radical Islamic education centers abroad, especially in the Middle East. In Bulgaria, we have a number of Islamic priests who have studied in Saudi Arabia in centers known as radical Islamic. On the other side, Bulgaria is a good example, having good relations with non-EU member states, like Turkey. We have strengthened our border areas on both sides in Bulgaria and Turkey. We have worked together to stop Islamic terrorists to cross the border to the EU, and it's a good example for other countries like our neighbors. So we have to control also the migration of citizens in the European Union. I mean the Romani people who can become carriers of radical Islamic ideas throughout Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is from Poland, Mr. Rafał Trzaskowski. Please.
Commissioner King, I wanted to thank you very much for treating cybersecurity as a priority. I think there is absolutely no doubt that this is one of the areas where we do need more cooperation in the European Union. I was pushing for more synergies in this policy when I was both Minister of Digitization and then Minister of European Affairs in the previous Polish government. But I think that certain doubts persist. I would like to say a few words about the Directive on Security of Network and Information Systems, because we definitely do need to do more. I mean, we were trying to put it on the agenda of the European Council 4 years ago. There were many doubts, and somehow they do persist, even though we have advanced so much in the legislative process. I mean, it seems that the lack of trust persists. We do need to do our utmost to fully implement the directive, and we need to be more concrete. We need to step up information exchange in the strategic sectors, but also try to identify other vulnerabilities, and this is absolutely crucial. Step up cyber deterrence and identify malicious actors. I think that this has become quite obvious in the recent months. But above all, we do need to build security and to build trust, because I think that there is a certain lack of trust, especially that sometimes we do have a problem to go beyond narrowly defined national security concerns. And I think that COSAC has a role to play as a facilitator of these efforts. And you do have an ally here in this room, Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is from Netherlands, Mr. Pieter Omtzigt. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. For the first time since the 1940s, we have thousands of members of our countries committing genocide. They're fighting for ISIS, and in June 2016, the Syria inquiry run by the UN determined that ISIS is committing genocide. The returnees from Syria, from Iraq and Libya have committed large terrorist attacks in Bataclan, Paris, in Zaventem, Brussels, at the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, and on many other places. a lot of our countries are not even locking up these people. Genocide is the crime of crimes, and under the Genocide Convention, all countries are obliged to punish the crimes of genocide. Yet, these people are walking around freely, and as long as countries who are within the Schengen area don't do anything, they don't only endanger their own citizens, they endanger the citizens of other countries as well. For the Council of Europe, I did an investigation and I found that a number of countries have dozens of returnees and not one of them in prison. What will be the European policy, I asked to Mr. King, to make sure that this genocide is being recognized, that the people, the European citizens that grew up in our own countries are punished for it, so we don't look like the fools of the whole world, that these people can walk freely? And in what way are we going to protect the citizen in our country from attacks from people in other countries that do not take their own responsibility? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is from Latvia, Ms. Lolita Chikane, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to also make an observation that was mentioned by some of the colleagues that who spoke previously, that there is a need to build trust and true ability to share information if we want to develop a true security union. However, the culture of security services is everything opposite. They are very careful about sharing information, very careful about potential leakages, and very careful about easily trusting others. So what additional measures are necessary to build this trust and to actually ensure that the information is shared in a safe way and the trust is there? And another question that I would like to ask to the Commissioner King is that the UK is indeed a very, very important security information provider for the security services of the European Union. And we are actually afraid of what's going to happen after the United Kingdom leaves the European Union. How do you envision the involvement of the UK in building the security union? Is there a potential for further cooperation and this valuable exchange? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor, UK, the Lord Deverson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have just really a number of questions for Commissioner King. First of all, I'd be interested to understand from him whether the internet companies and platforms are actually getting serious about this issue now. I get the impression for many years they've not taken this area particularly seriously in terms of cooperation. Is that happening? The EU looks at two ways on this issue in many ways. We are hugely tightening up personal information digitally at the moment and making sure that information about citizens is protected. How does he reconcile this with the requirements on the security side to make sure that we're safe? One of the areas we ease, in terms of cyber attacks, we perhaps quite lazily blame countries like Russia, Iran, North Korea. But we have, as we know from other areas, the best way to deter criminal activity is to apprehend the culprits. Are we being lazy about who actually initiates these attacks? And are there ways in which we can improve traceability in terms of who makes them? And lastly, one of the areas which is of increasing concern is foreign governments' interference through social media in our democratic processes in the Western world. I'd be interested to understand what progress we might be making in that area by the Commission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And our last intervention is from UK as well. The Baroness Neville-Rolfe, floor is yours, please.
Well, first, I'd like to thank the Estonian presidency for arranging such a fascinating and important session, and to the chair today for highlighting cyber, which is so important in Estonia. And I actually very much agree with Mr. Rafał Trzaskowski from Poland on the comments that he made on the subject. I also agree with a great deal that the Commissioner told us about. What he's doing, and I think his background, not only in Paris but also in Dublin, will be very important in the coming Brexit weeks and months. I was glad he referred to the need to build cybersecurity into the Internet of Things, into the products I'm conscious, for example, that this is not happening at the moment. I always turn off the Alexa that my son has imported into my kitchen, partly because it's very useful, obviously, because you can turn on the radio, but I worry about the consequences of having these sort of Internet of Things products around the home. And I think there needs to be a strategic approach to digital and the Internet across the security piece. And I would be very interested if the Commissioner were able to remind us of the key initiatives that will help us to reduce harm from the Internet and use it to help us to be more secure.
Thank you very much, all colleagues. You were wonderful. And now I give the floor to Commissioner King. Commissioner King, you have 8 excellent minutes to comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do justice to everyone's questions in just over 7 minutes, but I have very carefully noted all of the points that have been made. If I don't reply directly now, then I hope we will find an opportunity to be in touch separately, and I will follow up all those points that require action. I want again to say thank you very much for your engagement on these issues. I appreciated the engagement of all the national parliaments in the exercise we did earlier this year to comprehensively assess our security policies, which hadn't been done, it turned out, for 15 years. And it seemed to me appropriate as we seek to reinforce what we're doing to tackle these threats, that we took a moment to pause and assess what we'd done. And the feedback that we got from very many of you was extremely helpful. On that occasion and separately, I always value the input that we get from colleagues across the different national parliaments. Mr. Bizet was very kind in his comments, but the French Senate have been very helpful in the work that they've done to look at critically what we've been doing, for example, on police cooperation or on enhancing the interoperability of our different databases. And I genuinely find that kind of input very helpful, as indeed the input from colleagues in the Czech Senate on implementation and from the Belgian Parliament on a subject that hasn't come up yet, but which I wanted to mention, which is the need for us also to work to support victims of these horrible attacks. So that kind of input and interaction is something that I hope we will find ways of continuing, if not strengthening. Now, there's a huge range of questions. Let me try briefly to summarize the main points, and then there's 1 or 2 particular points I wanted to come back on. First of all, I hope that this isn't an area, the area of our cooperation in countering these security threats, where we need to be hindered or where our work is complicated by a debate about subsidiarity. Because I think we very largely share an analysis that there are very clear responsibilities for the member states and for the member state authorities, but that, given the nature of the threats, both offline terrorism and online cyber-enabled threats, we need to work together. And that there are some things that it is very helpful to do at the European level to help support and aid the member states. So I'm very clear that in doing that, we are in no way seeking to replace the member states and the member state responsibilities. So I do hope that we can very broadly agree that framework and not find ourselves held up on practical, vital practical cooperation by discussions around subsidiarity. I'm glad we talked about the 2 sets of threats, because I do think the cyber-enabled threats are extremely challenging. The pace of the evolution of those threats has been speeding up, and we need to be even more focused together in trying to counter them. It's not, we produced a set of proposals in September, which I'll mention in a moment, but it's not the first time that we've sought at a European level to try and grapple with the challenges of cyber. We had a cybersecurity strategy, as many of you will remember, in 2013. The trouble was, I don't think it was ambitious enough. In 2013, we set as a goal to get ahead of cybercrime. Since 2013, cybercrime in Europe has grown 5 times, and it is projected to grow 4 times more in the next 2 years. I think we need to do something about that. We need to, we may not be able to completely get ahead of it, but we must crack down on it. We must do more to slow the growth of what has been far too easy cyber crime plague that is acting as an amazingly significant drag on our economic growth, but is also spurning other forms of cyber-enabled interference, which has been referred to. So I strongly agree with those of you, Mr. Trzaskowski from Poland, Mr. Kielem from the European Parliament, who say that we need to focus on cyber. Baroness Neville-Rolfe asked what we've done. We've produced a set of proposals, some short-term, some slightly longer term, that we want now to take forward with you and all the member state authorities to reinforce our cyber resilience. That is both the resilience of our systems and of the devices that increasingly we plug in to the Internet of Things, but also our behavioral resilience. So I very much agree that raising issues of cyber hygiene and working to have a debate about critical awareness of what you're doing as an individual or an organization or as national authorities when you yourself engage with cyber means is incredibly important. We've set out a series of proposals which we're going to be taking forward to reinforce a European cybersecurity agency, to develop, building on the existing good public-private partnership, a strategic program of research into cybersecurity. We're doing some work in this area. The US, for example, are doing 10 times more this year than we're going to do in Europe over the next 2 years. So we need to step up the scale of our engagement, but also to connect the dots. So there are lots of different organizations across Europe who work in this area. We need to get them to work together, both to exchange information in advance of attacks, to make us a harder target, but also to be effective in response if there are attacks. We've also set out some proposals on building deterrence. Deterrence obviously does have a military dimension, and you've mentioned, one or two of you, the importance of thinking about cyber when we're building our work on PESCO and the European Defence Fund, and I agree with that. But there's a huge civil element to cyber deterrence. After all, 95% of what we're talking about is civilian, and the vast majority of that is privately owned. So we have to work very closely together across boundaries, civil, military, public, private, European, international, to build our deterrence. And a key part of that, as Lord Teverson noted, is to improve transparency and traceability so that we can get better at identifying perpetrators and then seeking to hold them to account. So the work that we're doing to have a discussion about the structure of the internet, both in Europe and internationally, to boost transparency and to remove impediments to getting hold of evidence that you need for prosecutions, wherever that is held, I think is very important. And the last element of the proposals we brought forward in September was to do with the vital subject of international cooperation. We need to work together on these issues between ourselves, between the European Union and NATO. I think this is cyber is a natural candidate for very close and reinforced cooperation between the EU and NATO, but also with other like-minded countries, in particular the United States. As we build and reinforce standards for example, Internet of Things devices, I think it's very important that we try and do that in a way that is transparent and I hope complementary with the US. Because after all, if the US and Europe are able to set standards in this area, that those norms will be incredibly influential and important, including with producers in China. So there's an enormous amount of work that we need to take forward there. Now, many of you, of course, were talking about the measures we need to take to reinforce our cooperation on countering terrorism. I would just like to say that I think that we have taken some important steps to reinforce the effectiveness of our controls at our external borders. Not just the efforts that we've made that I think you'll talk about more at the next session to reinforce the controls that take place at the so-called hotspots, the points of arrival of the large flows of migration that we've experienced over the last months and years, and the creation of a European border and coast guards to help and support those member states who are particularly in the front line. And I agree with those of you who underlined the importance of continuing to support those member states who are in the front line. But also through some of the steps that we've taken to reinforce what we know about people who are coming into our shared space. So I would point in particular to the revision of the Schengen Border Code, which means that everybody coming into the Schengen space now is controlled not only for their identity, but also against the EU's shared databases, in particular against the Schengen Information System. That system is becoming increasingly important. And as far as the Commission is concerned, as I'm sure you all know, we think that those countries who are not yet fully able to avail themselves of the Schengen Information System should be able to do so. And we urge the member states to take the decisions that are necessary in Council to make that happen. The sharing of information, as a number of you underlined, is crucially important. You can't just oblige people to share information, although we are trying to encourage to the extent possible. We've come forward with a proposal that would make it, that would ask the member states to take on an obligation to share information in the Schengen Information System for any suspect who is connected with terrorism. And I do hope that that is agreed. But another way of getting more information shared is to show that it is useful to share. So that is one of the key reasons why we are pushing so hard on this agenda of interoperability. And I would like to thank Mr. Ivanov for recognizing that the incoming Bulgarian presidency, continuing the work of the Estonian presidency, are going to help us to push this agenda. We need to get the best out of the information systems we've got. We need to show that the information is useful and can be accessed quickly and effectively by those on the front line, policemen, border guards, immigration officers who are trying to keep us safe. Because if it is useful, if people can see the benefits, then they will share more. And it is that virtuous circle that we are seeking to support. The challenge of the evolving nature of the threat means that we have to reinforce the work we're doing through our agencies, and we will continue to support Europol and the other agencies. It means that we need to find new ways of responding, such as the work that we're doing to help member states to reinforce protection of so-called soft targets, public spaces. And I attach particular importance, a number of you underlined this, to the work that we're doing to try and crack down on radicalizing propaganda online. As we squeeze the so-called Islamic State on the ground and in Iraq and Syria, we shouldn't expect the threat to go away. They will continue to pursue what they see as their struggle through other means. Some of the people who've been fighting on the ground will try and move elsewhere, but they will also redouble their efforts to pump out propaganda and radicalize vulnerable often young people across our communities. So we need to get the maximum cooperation we can from the big internet platforms to stifle that propaganda, to stop it going up in the first place, to take it down where it is discovered. We did agree, in reply to Mr. Yusul, some concrete deadlines at the recent G7 meeting to work with the big internet companies to take material down within 2 hours of it being posted where it is technically possible to do that. And that was an objective of the whole G7. Commission participated, that we agreed with the big internet, with representatives of the big internet platforms in the room. So we intend to try and hold them to that objective. And we will work to do whatever we can on a voluntary basis to achieve that, but if necessary, we reserve the right to use legislation. A last comment, if I may, on financing. Because a number of people asked about this, Mrs. Rodriguez Ramos and others. We take very seriously the work that we're doing to crack down on terrorist financing. We have shared definitions, we've boosted in cooperation across the European Union, we have mutual recognition, including for confiscation, but there is still work that we need to do to complete the 4th anti-money laundering directive that is on the table. So please support in your capitals the rapid conclusion of work on that so that we can reinforce financial information units and develop the necessary transparency about bank accounts and bank details that law enforcement need to do their job. I haven't been able, I'm afraid, to do justice to questions on defence, and I'm sure we'll have another occasion to deal with some of those. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner King. I believe we can agree that a lot has been done in order to protect our citizens. But unfortunately, the recent terrorist attacks have shown that the focus has shifted to soft targets. Therefore, we need to strengthen the protection of public spaces, and we need to fight against terrorism together. We need actions both on EU level and national level. Thank you very, very much for your fascinating debate. That was great to be in front of you and moderate panel Security Union. Thanks.
Suur tänu.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Colleagues, now we will have a coffee break, and please be back here at 10:45, 10:45.